he did resign 2 days later. After his resignation, after this Times series, he went to work for Exxon Corporation. And in truth, he never stopped working for Exxon. It's just that we've been paying him for the past 7 years. And there's nothing wrong with having business people in government. It's a good thing if your objective is to recruit competence and expertise. But in all of these situations, as I show in my book, these particular individuals have entered government service not to serve the public interest, but rather to subvert the very laws that they're now charged with enforcing in order to enrich the president's corporate paymasters. And they have imposed tremendous diminution in quality of life on the people of this country in the past 7 years. Most Americans are unaware of it, don't connect the dots, because we have a negligent and indolent press in this country that has simply let down American democracy. And I was, this morning when I was thinking about what I was going to say to you today, I said to Mary, I said, do you think I should talk about the press issue? And she said, that's a really important issue for people to understand, so I'll take a couple of minutes just to talk to you about it, because it is a critical issue, and it is the most critical issue in our democracy, is the devolution of the decline of the American press. And it's the largest environmental problem, that and our campaign finance system, which allows polluters to dominate decision-making within our government. And often against, or almost virtually always against, the interests of the American people, the long-term interests of our country. People talk about, I was in Nebraska the other day and people were talking about the liberal media. The liberal media, well, that's the big lie. That's like what Joseph Goebbels used to call the big lie. If you keep repeating something, a phrase long enough, people begin believing it. There's no liberal media in this country. There's Air America Radio and Pacifica. There's Rolling Stone magazine, Mother Jones, The Nation, and that's pretty much it. There's a right-wing media, and if you see where Americans are disproportionately getting their news, that's where it's coming from. Pew just did a study that showed that 30% of Americans now say their primary news source is talk radio, which is 95% controlled by the right. 22% say cable news, mainly Fox News. 10% say Sinclair Network, which is the most right-wing of all of the networks, of all of them. Sinclair is the biggest television network in America. It is controlled by a former pornographer who requires all 75 of his local affiliate stations to take a pledge that they will not report critically about this president, about the war in Iraq, and a number of other issues. Then the rest of us get our news. Only 11% of Americans now read newspapers. The rest of us get our news from the traditional corporate-owned media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, which has no ideology other than its own pocketbooks. And too often that ideology is coterminous with the ideology of the government in power, and particularly the Republican Party, which has been urging all of these corporate consolidations, which have driven this devolution. But this all began in 1988 when Ronald Reagan abolished the Fairness Doctrine. We had a law in this country that was passed in 1928 at the dawn of commercial radio that said that the media, that the airwaves belong to the public. If you have a newspaper, you can write anything you want, but the airwaves belong to us. That the broadcasters can use them, can be licensed to use them only with the proviso that they use them to promote the public interest and to advance American democracy. There were three requirements under the Fairness Doctrine. One, that they tell us news of public import. That does not mean Anna Nicole Smith. It means news that is important for us to make rational decisions in a democracy. That's why the networks all have a 6 o'clock news hour. They didn't want a 6 o'clock news hour. They were forced to have it under the Fairness Doctrine. That's why the radio stations periodically update us on the news. It was one of the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine. The second requirement was that if they're going to give opinion, they have to tell both sides. You couldn't have had a Fox News under the Fairness Doctrine. You couldn't have had a Rush Limbaugh. You could have Rush, 4 hours a day, but then you'd have to have a countervailing voice for 4 hours. You couldn't have had Rush and his ditto heads for 24 hours a day on the same station. Third, they had to avoid corporate consolidation. There had to be local control and diversity of control. And that provision was strengthened in 1945 by Congress because they saw that's one of the ways that the fascists, particularly Hitler, had taken over power in Europe, was to have all of these kind of consolidations and licensing agreement with the media, which allowed him to suppress dissent, suppress criticism. And Congress wanted to make sure that people in Kansas could get crop reports, people in North Dakota could get tornado warnings, people in the South could get country music, that you wouldn't have programming and content dictated by a couple of corporate epicenters around the country. But Ronald Reagan abolished the Fairness Doctrine in 1988 as a favor to the Christian right, which was already plotting the takeover of AM radio, and as a favor to the big studio heads who'd helped him get elected, who were plotting the takeover of all media. And today, as a result of that, we have 5 giant international corporations who control all 14,000 radio stations in America, all 2,000 television stations, 80% of our newspapers, all of our billboards, and most of the large internet content providers. So there's 5 guys who are deciding what Americans hear as news. The news departments have become corporate profit centers. They no longer have the obligation to promote the public interest or to serve the public interest. Their only obligation is their shareholders. So they've cut costs by abolishing their foreign news bureaus. When I was a kid, ABC had 47 foreign news bureaus in Europe. Today it has none. They buy their news in the can from news organizations over there. And we're supposed to be the leaders of the free world, but Americans have no clue about what's happening in the free world. And that's one of the reasons we accepted this kind of neocon fantasy that we'd be met by flowers in the streets when we, walked into a 2,000-year-old fist fight in Iraq. And, other countries who understand foreign cultures scoffed at this. But we didn't because, we have no idea what's happening because we're not being informed. You can't get foreign news in this country unless you go to BBC.